Markle got kicked off Graham Norton's show. It was supposed to be easy. Graham Norton's show had become legendary for its relaxed atmosphere, the kind of place where celebrities could let their guard down, share a glass of wine, and enjoy the banter. The show was known for its warmth, its humor, its ability to make even the most guarded stars feel at home. But on this particular evening, something was different from the moment Meghan Markle walked onto the set. The audience erupted in applause as she made her entrance, dressed impeccably as always, waving to the crowd with practiced grace. Graham stood to greet her, extending his hand with that signature warm smile that had welcomed countless guests over the years. "Meghan, welcome, welcome," Graham said, his Irish accent lilting with genuine enthusiasm. "It's so lovely to have you here." She settled into the chair, crossing her legs with deliberate poise. "Thank you for having me," she replied, her voice measured and controlled. Right from the start, there was a tension in the air that the audience could feel. Graham, ever the professional, tried to break the ice with his usual charm. "So, you've been keeping quite busy lately," he began, leaning back in his chair with casual ease. "Tell us what you've been up to." Meghan shifted in her seat. "Well, Graham, I've been working on several important projects. Projects that actually matter, you know. Things that make a real difference in the world." There was a slight edge to her voice, a subtle implication that hung in the air. Graham, sensing it, kept his smile steady. "That's wonderful," he said smoothly. "We'd love to hear about them." She launched into a detailed description of her various initiatives, but with each sentence, there seemed to be an underlying message about her own importance. The audience, usually so responsive, began to grow quiet. "You see, not everyone understands what it means to use your platform for good," she continued. "Some people are just content to sit around and entertain." Graham's eyebrows lifted slightly. He'd been doing this for decades and knew when a guest was testing boundaries. "Well, I like to think entertainment has value too," he offered with a gentle laugh. "Bringing people joy, giving them a break from their troubles. That's not nothing." "I suppose," Meghan said, with a tone that suggested she didn't really agree. "But surely you'd admit that some things are more important than others. I mean, look at what I could be doing right now instead of sitting here talking about trivial matters." Graham's smile tightened slightly. "Well, our millions of viewers don't seem to think what we do is trivial. They tune in every week because they enjoy it. They value it." "Of course they do," Meghan said with a dismissive wave of her hand. "People enjoy lots of things that don't really matter in the grand scheme of things. That's just human nature." The audience shifted uncomfortably. This wasn't the playful banter they'd come to expect. This felt pointed, almost confrontational. Graham, ever the professional, he had tried to steer the conversation to lighter waters. "Let's talk about your time in the spotlight. You've certainly experienced quite a journey. How do you handle all the attention?" Meghan's expression hardened. "The attention is relentless, Graham. You couldn't possibly understand what it's like to be scrutinized the way I am. Every single move I make is analyzed, criticized. It's exhausting." "I imagine it's very difficult," Graham said sympathetically. "Though I think many people in the public eye face similar challenges." "Not like this," she shot back. "My situation is unique. The level of persecution I face is unlike anything anyone else has experienced." The audience had gone completely silent now. Even Graham's practiced smile was beginning to show cracks. He glanced at his producer off camera, then back at his guest. "Well," he said carefully, "I think we can all agree that being in the public eye comes with challenges. But you've also had incredible opportunities, haven't you? The platform you mentioned using for good." Meghan's eyes narrowed. "Are you suggesting I should be grateful for the harassment?" "Not at all," Graham said quickly, maintaining his composure. "I'm simply saying that with the challenges also come opportunities. That's true for most people in your position." "Most people aren't in my position," she said sharply. "That's exactly my point." Graham took a breath, his legendary patience being tested. The atmosphere in the studio was growing more uncomfortable by the second. Even the cameramen were exchanging worried glances. This was not how interviews were supposed to go. He decided to try once more to lighten things up. "Listen, Meghan," he said, leaning forward slightly, "I understand you're passionate about your work. That's admirable. But this show has its own value, too. We've raised millions for charity over the years. We've given people a chance to laugh during difficult times. That's not nothing." Meghan's expression didn't soften. "Charity is wonderful, Graham. But real change requires more than just writing checks and making people laugh for an hour." "Tell you what," he said with forced brightness, "why don't we talk about something fun? I heard you've been learning to cook some traditional dishes. Any disasters in the kitchen we should know about?" Meghan looked at him as if he'd just asked the most offensive question imaginable. "I don't think my cooking skills are really relevant to the important work I'm doing, Graham." "Right. Of course," Graham said, his smile becoming slightly strained. "I just thought, a bit of lighthearted chat. That's rather what we do here." "Maybe that's the problem," Meghan said, and there was a pointed edge to her voice now. "Maybe we should be having more serious conversations instead of these shallow exchanges about cooking and celebrities." The audience gasped. You could have heard a pin drop in that studio. Graham's face remained calm, but his eyes had gone steely. This was his show, his format, and she'd just insulted everything he'd built over his career. "I see," Graham said quietly. "Well, Meghan, this show has been bringing joy to millions of people for many years. We pride ourselves on creating a space where people can relax, laugh, and yes, have some lighthearted fun. If that's not something you value, perhaps we're not the right fit." Meghan's expression shifted. For a moment, she seemed to realize she'd gone too far. But instead of backing down, she doubled down. "You're right," she said coolly. "Maybe we're not. Maybe I expected too much, thinking we could have an intelligent conversation here." The audience let out a collective sound of shock. Several people in the front row had their hands over their mouths. Graham sat perfectly still for a moment, and then something remarkable happened. He smiled, but it wasn't his usual warm smile. This was different. This was the smile of a man who'd had quite enough. "You know what, Meghan?" Graham said, his voice still calm but carrying an unmistakable authority. "I've been doing this show for a very long time. I've interviewed presidents, prime ministers, the biggest stars in the world. And you know what they all understand? They understand that coming on a talk show is a privilege, not a platform for condescension." Meghan's face flushed. "Excuse me?" "I think you heard me," Graham continued, and now his Irish accent seemed more pronounced, his words clipped and precise. "You've come onto my show, insulted the format, insulted what we do here, and frankly, insulted the intelligence of everyone watching, and I won't have it." "How dare you?" Meghan started, but Graham held up his hand. "No," he said firmly. "How dare you? You come here acting like you're above this show, above this audience, above the very medium that helped make you famous in the first place. You talk about using your platform for good, but what you're doing right now is using your platform to be rude and dismissive." The audience began to applaud. It started with one person, then another, and within seconds the entire studio was clapping. Meghan looked around in apparent disbelief. "This is ridiculous," she said, her voice rising. "You're making a scene over nothing." "I'm making a scene?" Graham asked, and there was genuine incredulity in his voice. "Meghan, you've spent the last 15 minutes telling me and everyone here that what we do doesn't matter, that entertainment is somehow beneath you, that your struggles are more important than anyone else's. You've been condescending, you've been rude, and you've shown absolutely no respect for this show or its audience." "I was simply trying to have a meaningful conversation," Meghan protested, but her voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. "No," Graham said, shaking his head. "You were trying to use my show as a soapbox while simultaneously looking down on it, and I'm afraid that's not how this works. This is my show. These are my guests, my audience, my crew, and we treat each other with respect here." Meghan stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "I don't have to sit here and be lectured by you." "You're absolutely right," Graham said, also standing. "You don't. In fact, I think it's best if you leave. This is my show, and I have standards for how guests behave. You've crossed the line." "Standards?" Meghan laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You want to talk about standards. You run a show where people get drunk and play silly games. Don't lecture me about standards." The audience gasped again, louder this time. Several people shook their heads in disbelief. Or Graham's expression remained calm, but his voice grew firmer. "Those silly games, as you call them, have brought joy to millions. Those conversations over a glass of wine have helped people open up and be themselves. We've had some of the most respected people in the world on this show, and they've all managed to have fun without being condescending. Clearly, that's too much to ask from you." The audience went completely silent. This was unprecedented. In all the years Graham Norton had been hosting his show, he had never asked a guest to leave. Not once. The tension in the room was electric. Meghan stared at him, her mouth slightly open. "You're kicking me off your show?" "I am," Graham said calmly, "because this is supposed to be a fun, welcoming environment. And right now, you're making everyone uncomfortable with your attitude and your disrespect. So yes, I'm asking you to leave." "This is outrageous," Meghan said, her voice shaking now. "Do you have any idea who I am?" And there it was, the line that would echo through social media for weeks to come. Graham looked at her for a long moment, and when he spoke, his voice was gentle but firm. "I know exactly who you are," he said quietly. "You're someone who forgot that being kind matters more than being important. You're someone who forgot that every person deserves respect, whether they're a talk show host or a member of the audience or anyone else. And you're someone who, right now, needs to leave my show." The audience erupted in applause again, this time even louder. People were on their feet, clapping and cheering for Graham. Meghan looked around at the sea of faces, all of them clearly on the host's side, and for the first time that evening, she seemed to be at a loss for words. She grabbed her purse from beside the chair, her movements sharp and angry. "This is unbelievable," she muttered, though the microphone still picked it up. "I came here as a courtesy, and this is how I'm treated. You should be thanking me for appearing on your little show." "Little show?" someone in the audience called out. Others murmured in agreement, a ripple of disapproval spreading through the crowd. They were done being polite. They'd watched this woman insult something they loved, someone they loved, and they'd had enough. "A courtesy?" Graham repeated, and there was genuine surprise in his voice. "Meghan, people come on this show because they want to connect with the audience, because they want to have a good time, because they enjoy being here, not as a courtesy, as a privilege." Meghan's face was red now, a mix of anger and what might have been embarrassment. "You'll regret this," she said, pointing a finger at him. "You have no idea what you've just done." Graham just smiled, that warm, genuine smile that millions loved. "I don't think I will," he said. "I think I'll sleep quite well tonight, actually, knowing I stood up for the values this show represents." She turned on her heel and began walking toward the exit. The audience continued clapping as she left, but it wasn't supportive applause. It was applause for Graham, for his courage in standing up to someone who had clearly crossed a line. As Meghan reached the edge of the set, she paused and turned back. "You know what, Graham?" she called out, her voice dripping with disdain. "Your little show here, your jokes and your wine and your silly games, they're all just distractions. Meaningless distractions from the real issues in the world. While you're sitting here making people giggle, there are serious problems that need addressing." The audience booed. Actually booed. It was unprecedented. Graham held up his hand, asking them to stop. He wanted to respond to this himself. Graham walked closer to where she stood. The cameras followed him, capturing every moment. When he spoke, his voice was loud enough for everyone to hear, but it wasn't angry. It was sad. "You know what I think is meaningless?" he said. "Coming onto someone's show and insulting them. Looking down on people who are just trying to bring a little happiness into the world. Acting like you're the only person who's ever faced hardship or criticism. That's what's meaningless. Because at the end of the day, Meghan, kindness matters. Joy matters. Making people laugh and feel good matters. And if you can't see that, then I genuinely feel sorry for you." The studio fell silent. Even the crew, usually busy with their tasks, had stopped to watch. Meghan opened her mouth as if to respond, but nothing came out. She looked at Graham, then at the audience, then back at Graham. "Goodbye, Meghan," Graham said quietly. She turned without another word and walked off the set. The sound of her heels clicking against the floor echoed through the silent studio until she disappeared through the exit. The door closed behind her with a soft thud. For a moment, nobody moved. Graham stood there, looking at the empty doorway, taking a deep breath. Then he turned back to the audience and the cameras, and slowly that famous smile returned to his face. "Well," he said, and there was a slight shake in his voice that betrayed how much that confrontation had affected him. "That was unexpected." The audience laughed, a release of all the tension that had been building. Then they stood up and gave Graham the longest, loudest standing ovation he'd ever received. People were cheering. Some were even crying, moved by his quiet dignity in the face of such rudeness. Graham waited for the applause to die down, his eyes glistening slightly. "Thank you," he said softly. "Thank you so much. You know, I've been doing this job for a long time, and I've always believed that this show is about bringing people together, about creating a space where everyone feels welcome, where we can all have a laugh and forget our troubles for a while." He paused, collecting himself. "And I will never, ever apologize for that. Because making people happy, giving them something to smile about, that's not meaningless. That's everything." More applause. Graham held up his hand, asking for quiet. "Now," he said, his smile growing wider, "we still have a show to do, and I promise you, the rest of the evening will be much more fun." The audience cheered again. One woman in the front row stood up and shouted, "We love you, Graham!" Others joined in, echoing the sentiment. Graham looked genuinely touched. "I love you too," he said, placing his hand over his heart. "All of you. That's why we do this. That's why this show exists." He walked back to his chair and sat down, straightening his jacket. The cameras remained on him as he took a sip of water, composing himself. Then he looked directly at the camera, that twinkle returning to his eye. "Right then," he said, his tone shifting back to that familiar warmth. "Where were we? Oh yes, we have some absolutely brilliant guests coming up. People who understand what this show is about. People who are here to have fun and make you laugh." The band started playing, the audience clapped along, and just like that, the show continued. But everyone in that studio knew they'd witnessed something remarkable. They'd seen a man stand up for his values, defend his show and his audience, and do it all with grace and dignity. Backstage, crew members were buzzing about what had just happened. The producer was on the phone, no doubt dealing with the fallout that would inevitably come. But Graham remained focused on his job, on bringing joy to the people watching. The confrontation had lasted less than 20 minutes from start to finish, but it had felt like hours. The shift from a normal interview to a full-blown clash had been gradual at first, then sudden. Each dismissive comment from Meghan had built on the last, each condescending remark adding another layer of tension, until finally, with that one question, "Do you have any idea who I am?" the whole thing had exploded. And Graham had handled it perfectly. He hadn't lost his temper. He hadn't shouted or become aggressive. He'd simply stood his ground, defended his show and his values, and when it became clear that Meghan wasn't going to change her attitude, he'd asked her to leave. It was simple, direct, and absolutely justified. As the evening went on and the other guests came out, the energy in the studio was electric. Everyone there felt like they'd been part of something important. They'd seen someone stand up against entitlement, against rudeness, against the idea that fame gives you the right to look down on others. Between segments, during the commercial breaks, audience members would lean over to each other and whisper about what they'd witnessed. Can you believe that happened? I can't wait to tell everyone about this. Graham was absolutely right. The consensus was unanimous. He'd done the right thing. The rest of the show went smoothly. The other guests were delightful, funny, and respectful. They played the games, told their stories, and helped Graham create the kind of warm, entertaining atmosphere that had made the show so beloved. It was a stark contrast to what had come before, and it only reinforced how out of line Meghan's behavior had been. As the show drew to a close and Graham said his goodbyes to the audience, there was a sense that something had changed. This wasn't just another episode. This was the night Graham Norton showed the world that kindness and respect matter, that entertainment has value, and that no amount of fame or status gives anyone the right to be rude. The cameras stopped rolling. The audience filed out, still buzzing with excitement about what they'd seen. Graham sat in his chair for a moment, alone on the set, and let out a long breath. It had been one of the most difficult interviews of his career, but he'd handled it the only way he knew how. With honesty, with integrity, and with unwavering respect for his audience. Then one of the producers approached him cautiously. "That was incredible, Graham. Are you okay?" Graham smiled, a real smile this time, not the professional one he wore for the cameras. "I'm fine. Really. I meant every word I said. This show has always been about bringing people together, about creating joy, and I won't let anyone turn it into something else." "You did the right thing," the producer said firmly. "Everyone here knows it. The audience knows it. And I think the world is going to know it too." Graham nodded, standing up and stretching. "Well, it's done now. Let's just focus on making great television. That's what we're here for." And that was it. The moment had passed, but its impact would resonate far beyond that studio, far beyond that evening. Because sometimes, the most important thing you can do is stand up for what you believe in, even when it's uncomfortable, even when it means making a difficult decision, even when it means asking someone to leave. Graham Norton had spent decades building a show based on warmth, humor, and respect. And on this night, he'd proven that those values weren't just words. They were principles he was willing to defend, no matter who was sitting in the guest chair. That 33-second exchange, from "Do you have any idea who I am?" to "I know exactly who you are," had defined everything.